This is Giovanni Di Stefano for SLI Media, June 2009, in Rome, in Italy. Now, many of you have sent me emails. Most of the media have asked me, whatever happened to Chemical Ali? Well, Chemical Ali is, of course, Mr. Ali Hassan Abdullah al-Majid al-Tikriti, because he was born in Tikriti, where Saddam Hussein was, and that is his name. As most of you know, 3 sentences of death so far, yet purely by a feather and by a miracle we've been able to save his life. How has that been achieved? Is it because there was a political change in Iraq? Well, maybe. But the reality of the fact is this. First of all, let me say that Mr. Al-Majid is ill. He is suffering from cancer, and therefore the act of death will come whenever it comes. In his own words, he welcomes that himself and has no desire whatsoever to live, especially after the most vicious, brutal act of vengeance that occurred in Syria, where his wife and daughter were brutally, murderously raped and murdered. The man has no desire to live, so for him it makes no difference what steps that we as the lawyers take in his case. And there is an ongoing trial at the moment, which frankly is a waste of time completely, because the presence of all in the courtroom except the judge is frankly superfluous. But that's another matter. We'll deal with that in another time there. Now, how have we been able to save his life so far legally? On the 24th of December 2008, I filed, together with my colleagues from the Iraqi bar, an application with the court in Iraq, saying, wait a moment, the sentence of death is inconstitutional. Why? Because one has to understand the history of executions and death here. If you remember, especially in the United Kingdom, death is more an act of vengeance. It's more an act of a warning against others. It's not so much a sentence or a punishment. That's why, for example, you were hung from the highest hill so that people could see where your Cromwell was executed, and his body spread all over the United. These were acts of warnings to others. But the law is a little bit more precise, of course. Sentiments and other matters are dealt with by priests, but we as lawyers have to deal with the reality of life. Now, the actual sentence of death in Iraq is pronounced exactly the same way as it used to be in the United Kingdom when there was the death sentence. And it's somewhat odd that the words that are used are as follows: that you are liable to suffer death. Well, the application that we filed, which will be, is posted onto our website, and you can read it, of course. Liable, it's a historically British word, liable, a liability. You may be liable if you meet me to take me to dinner and to pay, but you don't have to. It's a question of liable. So, when a person is sentenced to death, it has to be precise, it has to be definitive. The person has to know that he is going to be executed. But the words liable, look please at the Oxford English Dictionary. What does the word liable mean there? It means exposed or subject to. You know, it's not definitive. Even, for example, in the Iraqi and the criminal, the British sentencing practices, one is liable to imprisonment for X years. What does it mean you serve all that? That's why if you are liable to an imprisonment for 10 years, you don't actually do 10 years, you do less, because that's the maximum that can happen to you. But that is not good enough, unfortunately, as far as the law is concerned. The law is very, very much precise. And what we did was that, based upon the historic wording of the pronunciation of death, we asked the Supreme Court to review whether the words are appropriately used. And of course, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, because Mr. Al-Majid Kemikhaladi is still alive. So whatever can be said about us, whether that single word liable, was used and applied, and whether we racked our brains to try and find a way of saving this man's life, who doesn't want his life to be saved, by the way, I don't know. But certainly to date, and we are now in June, many, many months, years, even after the sentence of death, that single word, liable, within a criminal code and sentencing practice, is clearly wrong, because he is still alive. And of course, we will see what the Supreme Court. But it seems to me that in Iraq, there's no hurry at all to decide this, because if we are right on Mr. Al-Majid, it's the same wordings, of course, that were used for my client Saddam Hussein, for Barzan al-Tikriti, for Awad al-Banda, for Taha Yassin Ramadan. But of course, we can't bring those back, and I think an application for a posthumous pardon may not reap any benefits there. However, what it does do is that all those that have been sentenced to death and are waiting, and there have been no executions since, we've done some good in one way or another. And that's all that we as lawyers can do. We present the case. That's all that we can do. And in this case, it has succeeded. This is Giovanni Di Stefano for SLI Media in Rome, June 2000.